In this tutorial, we're going to create an old newspaper using polygons, our edge loop, and then finally the sculpt tool. We're going to start by creating a free image plane. And we're going to place a reference file that will later serve as the actual texture for our newspaper. So I'm going to go to the attributes. I'll hit Control A. And I'm going to go to the folder next to image name. And I'm going to reference my picture that'll give me the proportions I need to later use this as the actual texture map. While I'm there, I'm going to drop the alpha to 0.5. And that'll give me a bit of translucence. Now I want the paper to lay down. I'm going to rotate this free image plane so that it's horizontal. So I'll just rotate it like so. And I'm going to drop it below the grid so that when I introduce the Polygon Plane to make the model from this reference, it's not embedded inside the actual free image plane itself. I'm going to go over now and I'm going to apply the image plane to a new layer, and I'll name it, and I'm going to lock it down. Now I'm going to go to my top view, and in my top view I'm going to hold down the space bar. I'm going to go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and Plane, and I'll click and drag a plane that fits the template. I'm now going to go over to the inputs, and I'm going to set this for 10 faces. Now I want to be able to bend this eventually so it looks like it's folded, so we could keep one perhaps that's open and then one that's folded as well. So I'm going to turn off the image plane for a moment, and I'm going to get my edge loop tool, and I'm going to go to where the center of this page would turn, which would be probably that path right in the middle. So this will be the center. I'll go to my object mode, and I'm going to hold down X. I'm going to snap that to the grid. Now that I have my basic geometry, I'm going to make this a two-page spread that's laying out open, perhaps on a table. So I'm going to go in and make reference to a bit of a crease that might be in the center of these two pages. And I'm going to right-click and choose Edge. I'm going to select this edge, then I'll Shift-select this edge. I'm leaving one in the center unselected because now I want to lift that up a bit. So there would be a bit of a crease here. So if I was to hit 3, we would probably have something like that. I'll do one last row. I'll double-click on this and double-click on the one on the other side, holding the Shift, and lift that a bit. Now I'm going to apply the texture to it. I'm going to go to Object Mode, right-click, choose Assign New Material, Arnold AI Standard, and then I'll go through my Color tab and find the file I'm looking for. Now I'm going to go to the UV editor, and in my UV editor, I'll scale the UV shell so that I see the whole layout. Now once I've returned to my viewport, I want to make this seem a little older. I want it to be a bit wrinkled rather than this clean layout. So I'm going to select my geometry, hold down the space bar, and I'm going to choose Mesh and Smooth. And that's going to add a lot more geometry to it, make it a little smoother, but it's also going to give me the opportunity to use the Sculpt tool. Now, Sculpt tool appears to be this orange ball with kind of a crescent on it. If I wanted to place that on my dock, I would have to hold down Command-Shift. And I'll go to Mesh Tools, Sculpting Tools, and the very first tool at the top is the Sculpt tool. I'm going to select it, and then on the toolbar on the left-hand side of the interface, I'll double-click on the icon, and I'll get the settings for the tool. Now in here I can change the size and the strength. So the brushes are kind of big here. I'm going to hit 5 on the keyboard so that change is more evident and there's no distraction from the texture. I'll make the brush smaller. And then I'll start to brush on this. And I'm starting to get some effects here. Just enough to make it look like perhaps it was damp and then dried. Might be some wrinkles on it. And if I want to, I could put more influence on it. Maybe a larger brush. I'm holding B on the keyboard, and if I drag up and down with my left mouse, I can change the size of the brush. The other option would be right here in the settings. Now if I want to change the influence or the weight, in this case it's referred to as strength, I could hold M on the keyboard. And when you click and drag, you'll see a vertical line going through your brush icon. The longer that line is, the more influence. So you can see now I'm getting quite a bit of influence on this. Now, if it becomes too much, I can always click on the invert below strength in settings, and I can push that back down again. Now I might want to change the strength on that as I do, so I'll hold down, and I'll drag down with my left mouse, and I'll go back and flatten that out. Bear in mind, when you use this tool, you may find that you will have to run the smooth on it again. It may seem a little jagged, perhaps because the poly count is low. So the higher the count of your polygons, the more of an effect you will get. And the more the effect, the more you want it to be smooth in the end. So I've just hit 3 on the keyboard, and you can see it's quite smooth. I'll put my texture on, and you can see now we've got a newspaper. Now in the event you want to have this folded, it's a pretty easy process. I'm going to duplicate this. I'll just put this off to the side, and then I'm going to go to the top view of the one I'd like to fold in half. I'll right click and I'll choose edge, and I'll select the first or second row through. Holding the shift key and hitting the period on the main keypad, I can go in and select other rows I might want. So I'll stop right there because these 3 close lines will represent the spine. Now I want to fold it, so I need to have the pivot here. And I'm going to go into my perspective view. Now I want the front page to be on top, so in this instance I'll get my rotation tool and I'll rotate this kind of straight down. And then I'm going to return to the top view, and I'm going to select another row. Holding down the shift and hitting the plus sign, now I have another row. Now I'll return to my perspective view, and before I do, I'm going to change the pivot. So hold down D, change it in the top view, and I'm going to change the pivot in the side view. On the Z-axis, I'll start to rotate it where I'd like it to be. So now if I go to my perspective view, you can see we've got that folded. Now if you need it to be more than one page, you might find yourself simply duplicating it. And in this case, I'll send it to the pivot again. I'll get my move tool, and I'll drag it. Then I'll get my scale tool, and I'll flatten it a bit, just so it's not conflicting with the one that's on top. So you can see now, if you needed to, you could add even more of those. And that's pretty much how you'd make kind of an old newspaper.